Barkeep, a man could die of thirst in this pub. Somebody buy me a pint, please. Hello out there, everybody, and welcome to episode number 15 of the slightly more well-known than last week, thanks to Eric Lutz, Empty Pockets podcast with yours truly, Skip Healy. That was a little bit of what we call here a kleine Vorspies, a little appetizer, an amuse-bouche, if you will, a little taste of what is coming. That is some of the incredible piping of my friend for 35 years or so, Mr. Tim Britton, originally from the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but for the last 40 years or so residing out in Iowa. Here's a little bit of my evening spent with the great Tim Britton. So, Timmy, I see you're all strapped in there, ready for action. Do you have a set of tunes you could enchant us with?
I'm not sure. I think I have a couple, probably, in there.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised.
Let's see. These are a few old favorites of mine. Nice piping tunes.
Yes, sir. I think you did remember a couple. I love that Garret Barry's. Just so everybody out there knows, I am the very proud owner of my second set of pipes from Tim. I have one of his deluxe sets that usually on the pipes there's 3D drones, and Timmy has an option on his set, which I highly recommend, of an optional A drone, which gives a nice little juice when you want to add it in. And Garret Barry's was, when I was playing the pipes, often that was always one of my favorite tunes. The last tune in that set of jigs. Such a great tune on the pipes.
Absolutely, a classic. Garret Barry being a classic piper.
There you go.
Yeah.
So we're recording this on the 12th of August. And this has been a little bit of a difficult day for me and for a lot of people in the American, excuse me, when I get choked up here for a minute, in the American fife and drum community. Today marks 1 year since one of the real cornerstones of the American fife and drum community passed away. My best friend for 50 years, a guy by the name of John Chalya, a great player, very innovative in bringing classical style arrangements into American fife music. Had a lot of adventures with John over the years. I've recounted some of them already to everybody, but I'd like to ask a favor of Timmy, if he would be so kind. Timmy is, as you just heard, he's got amazing control playing the pipes. And one thing I always used to love listening to when we used to play together back in the last century at this point. I love being able to say that. Not everyone has been able to say that,
That's true.
But Tim is a beautiful player of slow airs on the pipes. I wonder if I could impose on you, Timmy, to give us a bit of a slow air.
Sure. I tend to get a little stuck in the ones that I always play, but I'm gonna play one that I often play anyway, just because that's where my head's at the moment. This is one that I recorded with the trio Cool Rua as a solo, and Pat Egan joined me on guitar and the jigs afterwards. But I'll just play the air since I just played some jigs.
Okay, thank you.
This is I got this from one of the first records of piping that I ever got, the Drones and the Chanters.
I have that. Yeah, that yellow album with that's an amazing album. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got a beautiful picture that I used to stare at for hours and hours and scrutinize the details of an old Thomas Kenna set, flat set of pipes. But that's features a lot of the best pipers of that particular era around 1970. And amongst them was Seamus Ennis, and he played this air on there. It's The Wounded Hussar.
Oh, yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
gorgeous, Timmy. John would have loved that. Thank you.
I remember you talking about him actually back in the
Yeah,
day.
he was a huge influence on me, uh, for sure, uh, and on literally hundreds and hundreds of other fife players
Mhm.
around the world. He really broadened and expanded the idea of what was possible to do on the American fife in small ensembles and with large corps. Before John, some harmony was used in American fife and drum, but a lot of it was either very, very simple, following the tune, or a lot of kind of block chord harmonies, kind of oompa harmonies in the backgrounds of things. But John wrote. He was a huge admirer of J.S. Bach, so he
Mm.
wrote these very contrapuntal kind of very busy, very
Mhm.
chromatic harmony. You needed the 10-hole fife to play
Oh, cool.
a lot of John's work. So
Mhm.
some really beautiful stuff. And I know if he was listening to that, he would have heard like 100 things to do with it. So
Yeah. I
we were
was,
just talking
yeah.
about this one album that was very influential on both of us, in that it highlighted a lot of uh, pipers a little bit early back into the 70s, pipers from the 60s and things like that. Could you talk a little bit about who some of your influences were on the pipes, or currently still are?
Um, well, the obvious first, primary answer is Seamus Ennis and Willie Clancy. By far are, not that I've adhered to them particularly. Uh, the way, there's a few people out there who kind of make a point of really trying to copy that stuff. I did that initially. Of course, it's one of the greatest ways to learn is to just absolutely scrutinize every nuance of the great players. And I did that mostly via records.
Yep.
I didn't actually have any formal instruction more than a tiny bit here and there, bits and pieces. I started out with a guy. Uh, I had my parents. We talked about it earlier. They were very much involved in the Philadelphia folk music scene and all the folk scene in general on the East Coast. And we used to travel around every summer and go to festivals and different residencies that my father was teaching at and performing at. And one of them was a 2-week long chamber music camp that my father was teaching classic guitar, voice, and improvisation to classical players, which is
Oh
interesting
wow,
because most of them don't think
that's
that way.
something.
And so, and it was in, in the mountains of western North Carolina, Burnsville near Burnsville, Mars Hill College in Mars Hill, North Carolina. And there was great instructors there from all over, and a couple of them were a couple, married couple from Oberlin. And the one taught flute and the other taught French horn, and but the French horn player played Scottish bagpipes,
Oh,
and they had 3 kids that were about my age, and the 2 younger ones were very good Highland dancers, and so they did a little performance. In fact, we went there several years in a row, and they were there every time, and they would perform at some point during the 2 weeks. They'd always do that thing with the Highland pipes. He was a very good piper, as you might imagine, being a top class French horn player. And they're just really cool people. And I was hanging out with the kids. We were sort of loose ends most of the time while my parents were busy doing the stuff, and so we were like at the pool and in the college and things like that, and just boinking around. But I got very enamored with their whole family, and especially Bob and Susan Fries. They were the parents that, and his playing of the Scottish pipes and the kids doing the Highland dancing, the whole pageantry of it, and the intensity of it, and the richness and depth of it. And so I went back home, resolved to learn Highland pipes and Highland dancing, which I did. Went back home and started up with one of the better Highland dance teachers in the country at the time, Marguerite Reed, lived in Philly, Northeast Philly. So, and I had the luck of the custodian, one of the custodians at my elementary school was a Highland piper.
Oh,
and I was aware of that. He's actually he was from Donegal, and he was like an Ulster Scot kind of background, and so he was a good piper, and they had a little band. Several pipers in the area would get together and rehearse in the elementary school gym, and so I started going there and learned both from him and some of the other people who were in the band. And my parents, being, very much involved with the folk scene there, were very good friends with a guy named Kenny Goldstein, who was the head of the folklore department at the University of Pennsylvania and also the president of the American Folklife Society. And he was also one of the people who started the folk song society and folk festival in Philly. And so Kenny, his specialty was Celtic music. So when he heard that I was doing the Scottish pipes, he told my parents, there's these other pipes called the uilleann pipes, and hardly anybody knows about them. But there's a guy in New Jersey over the river who plays them, and you should check them out. And it turns out that two of the people in the band playing Scottish pipes were also acquaintances of this guy, and so all this sort of happened around the same time. I was about 11, I think, and I might have been just turning 11, I think. In any case, we went to visit this guy, Tom Standevan, who was the guy in New Jersey. And Tom is an extremely interesting guy, and in that he was, born and raised in America, but he was somewhat of a genius, and with a particular focus on languages and also Irish music and other kinds of music. He was very into bagpipes of various places. He had Britton, the tiny little guy that's like a Highland pipe at an octave higher, if you can imagine that, and super loud, and the one drone, and that played with the bombard, and he also played Bulgarian gaita. And he spoke Bulgarian, Turkish, probably most languages of the usual suspects, as well as all dialects of Gaelic, Irish. And extremely knowledgeable guy, and very, this was at a time, in 1971, where there was, Irish music was just starting to kind of come out into a larger audience outside of the Irish communities and, of course, Ireland, and through some, commercial venues through the folk music scene. And it hadn't really become popular yet, but it was about to. And people like the Clancy brothers, of course, had kind of been a big part of the folk revival in the early 60s. But the what they call traditional Irish music these days, which is specifically in reference to the instrumental stuff, wasn't really that well known, and so the chieftains were just beginning to make their mark. We were starting to see groups, within a year or two of that. Clannad was around, and I think by the time I met Tom, it might have been 1972. I can't remember, but somewhere in there. And Boys of the Loch. Then just after that, Planxty and the Bothy Band eventually.
And Fairport
years later.
Convention was around at
Right.
that.
Yeah. Yep. Fairport,
Dave
and
Schwarber,
the
all
whole
that.
English. Yep.
Exactly.
The English ballad scene was hot and heavy. That was sort of an earlier, uh, you know, uh, highly featured aspect of the folk revival in the '60s and '50s, and even before for those people who were into it then. But Irish music was still pretty backwaterish until it wasn't,
Yeah.
and then it became sort of the hot, new kid on the block, and all the festivals were featuring, the hot young up and coming bands, and also some of the older players like, I had a funny experience. What happened with Kenny is that not only did he introduce me to Irish music in that regard, but he invited me to come to his library and record everything that I wanted to. And
Oh
he had
wow.
a massive library, both the books and records, and especially a lot of stuff in the Celtic, Irish and Scottish and whatever music. So, and he had done field recordings himself, being a folklorist. And in any case, I went over there and recorded everything he had of Irish music, and I hand wrote out the liner notes on a
Mhm.
pad. Um, and and anyway, and then I proceeded to learn every note of every tune on every one of those records, which was maybe something like about 2 dozen records at the time.
Yep.
And it was like all of Seamus Ennis's records, Willie Clancy's records, some other
Awesome.
things that were starting to come out on Claddagh and Topic, and there was a great record of Cathal McConnell and Robin Morton called Ulster's Flowery Vale.
Oh yeah,
A
sure,
lot of
yeah.
songs, as well as some tunes from Cathal on flute and whistle, and just some wonderful stuff. The Breeze from Erin, which had Willie Clancy on it, among other people, and Show to Kill, volumes 1 and 2, and just a bunch of stuff. And so that was the primary source of my tuition, was those records.
Hmm.
And But I had an interesting experience where I was listening to this Seamus Ennis record, or the tape of it that I had made on cassette, and it just struck me in the strangest way. It was just sort of like deja vu, like, and I thought, I just sort of like kept rolling. But a few years later, I was going through my parents' attic, and as I was wont to do, just sort of exploring. And there was all kinds of stuff up there, as you may, a lot of attics accumulate relics of the past. And I eventually discovered this flyer from the first, I think it was either first or second Philadelphia Folk Festival,
Oh
and it
geez.
had the list of the performers. And I was there. I was, like a little munchkin. I was born in 1960 in November, so um, I was like 1 or 2 years old, maybe. Um, and I was like, oh, and there was Seamus Ennis's name on the thing, and I was like, oh. So I had heard him,
Hmm.
and I have some memories of not so much that. That's a little bit too buried in the mists, but to remember clearly. But there are other memories I have when I was quite young, and listening to like Sweet Honey in the Rock, and people
Hmm.
like that, and Louis Killen, and
Oh sure.
a lot of wonderful people. Excuse me. Not only at
Okay.
that festival, but other festivals that we went to, notably Fox Hollow up in Petersburg, New York, right on the border with Massachusetts, and almost on the border of Vermont, right in the corner there. A magical festival that was a lot more sort of up close and personal, similar to the early Philadelphia Folk Festival, but the Philly Fest got huge.
Hmm. You remember
So
Dave Payton, the concertina player?
I surely do.
Okay,
He
he
was
told
part of
me.
that whole scene as well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. With his dad and mother with Folk Legacy Records, and
Right.
so Dave grew up listening to. He told me a story one time that when he was really tiny, his parents were recalling all this Appalachian and American music, and then it might have been at the festival you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Dave said when he'd never heard anything about Irish music until when he was really little, Seamus Ennis bounced him on his knee and diddled a tune into his head.
Oh
He
my
said, and he
gosh.
swears that's how he started. His interest
Yeah.
in trad Irish music started was Seamus Ennis diddling a tune to him when he was a little kid.
Amazing. What a magical thing.
Incredible, huh?
I'm trying to think. Dave's got to be around the same age as me,
Yeah.
and anyway, Seamus Ennis never played at Fox Hollow, but the Paytons were definitely there. It might have been Eisteddfod that was
Hmm.
also out on the Cape there, and or it could have been Philadelphia Folk Festival. The Paytons were, very much
Everywhere. Yeah.
around in the East Coast scene, so
Yeah.
I remember them very well. I didn't actually know David until a little later, after we were both very much in Irish music, and
Hmm.
when I was probably maybe 18 or something. But he was probably bouncing around. I just never got to know him particularly well until later on. But great
Yeah.
player,
And it's
concertina.
funny, you mentioned about six things when you were telling your story there. But one of the ones is a player that I wanted to ask you if you knew, because I've played for years, and John Charlie and I played together in this group called the Ancient Mariners, this fife and
Right.
drum group. And one of the drum majors that we had was a man called Patty O'Sullivan, who lived in
Hmm.
New York City, and he was a
Oh, okay.
very, very, very good Highland piper.
Uh-huh.
And he asked me years, back in the 1980s, and he could not remember the man's last name, but he said, no, this is Piper that I met down around Philadelphia, Tom Standoffish,
Jesus.
and he said, and he was playing this damn octopus. I've never seen this thing. He was all strapped up in this thing,
Yeah.
and it looked like the chanter got shorter and longer somehow. And so I always wondered if how some chanters they have the little button on the bottom
Yeah, I think he is just confused by
by
the
just playing the low D.
overwhelm. Yeah, maybe that was it. He did. Tom did play a Taylor style set. I don't remember whether it was actually a Taylor set or one of the people who modeled their pipes after Taylor. But very distinctive style developed in the States by the Taylor brothers in Philadelphia and around the turn of the century.
Mhm.
And they had to their operation was threatened by Y2K, and
Hmm.
just kidding. Uh, the other century.
Yeah, the other century.
Anyway, no, the Taylor brothers came over from Drogheda and were making really unusual pipes, and in that they were kind of developed in the direction of kind of machining things in all kinds of complicated ways. And one of the things they did is they put these flapper valves on the bottom
Yeah.
that were sprung loaded. Very nicely engineered stuff. And for those who are familiar with them, they, there's no pipes that look like theirs except for theirs and people who have copied them. Everything
Mhm.
else looks quite different. And the way the keys operate and a lot of other things. But anyway, Tom had one of those sets. And I should also mention, while we're talking about Tom, not only was he just an interesting guy, in all kinds of ways in terms of what he knew, but he really he always wore black. He looked like a priest, but he wasn't a priest, and he he was extremely passionate about the language particularly, and the culture in general, but also the what you might call the real culture in its home of people, playing in their own kitchens. Basically, he was very anti-commercial,
Mhm.
and he didn't like the fact that the music was kind of finding its way into commercial venues, and even though it was getting popular and spread, he cherished the kind of down-home context where this was a part of people's very humble lives, and it wasn't about showmanship, it wasn't about making money, it was a very different thing that represented a cultural lineage that went back millennia. And even though Irish music as we know it today is mostly from the last 500 years, it obviously, one would imagine, it has its roots in older traditions. But in any case, he was a huge proponent of the language. In fact, when I first met him, one of the first things he said was, if you want to learn the pipes, you have to, first of all, you have to be a gentleman. In other words, you have to be worthy of them. You have to be a good person, because this is, a sacred thing. And he didn't use that word, but that was the vibe. And this is, you be partaking in something that is a very profound gift that has been passed through many hands, and it's worthy of your integrity. And kind of, he felt that it was necessary, to be, have integrity in order to even think about going there. It was an interesting attitude. And the next thing he says, the second thing is you need to learn the Irish language, because if there was no language, there'd be no music. So a very hard line.
Wow.
And I've never heard anybody talk about Irish music like that before or since.
No.
But he was absolutely clear as day about it. And I can't remember the third thing. But
don't forget the first two.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a little intimidating on the one hand, but I was very young and I wasn't used to being intimidated, I guess, in this way. But I was like, cool, where do I sign, Mm-hmm. So I wasn't sure what he was, exactly referring to in terms of being a gentleman, but I wasn't averse to trying to be a good person somewhere. I hadn't developed my evil ways quite as much yet at that point. But, anyway.
Well, you hung out with me long enough to develop a couple evil ways, but I could never get you to jump on the boat with me, Timmy.
Oh man. Well, I'm still working up to it. I'm just a little shy, but anyway, mostly I hide behind my instruments very effectively, but occasionally I'll get my courage up to sing a song and use the best instrument of all, the human voice. And this one I'm going to sing now is called Lagan Love. It's there's a lot of different subgenres within Irish music, and one of them is songs that are considered by the cognoscenti to be kind of art songs, in that they were composed. They're sort of part of the tradition per se, but they're not part of the older, more folk tradition that was carried on primarily by in an informal setting, shall we say. And this sort of crosses that, the art songs tend to cross that boundary a bit, but they are still identified as somewhat separate. This, as I said, is called Lagan Love. Lagan is the name of a river, the River Lagan, that flows through Belfast up in the north of Ireland, among other places. And in the song, it's in English, but there is one phrase that will not make any sense to you unless I tell you about it. It's uilleann she, which is Irish for a particular kind of fairy woman who would steal the hearts of the artist types and leave them forlorn and aching for them. And in this case, the composer of the song is comparing this woman that he's fallen, that he's smitten by, to uilleann she. Where the Lagan stream sings a lullaby, there blooms a lily fair. The twilight's gleam is in her eye. The night is on her hair. And like a lovesick London she hath my heart enthralled. No life I own, nor liberty, for love is Lord of all. And often when the beetle's horn hath lulled the eve to sleep, I steal unto her cabin warm, and through the door I peep. There on the cricket singing stone, she says the bog would fire, and hums in a sad lovesick. Sorry about that. And like a lovesick London she saves the bogwood fire, and hums in a sad, sweet undertone the song of heart's desire.